When Marcus Thompson was left wheelchair-bound after a devastating accident, his wife Jennifer looked at him with nothing but contempt and disgust. She walked out with another man, completely convinced her husband was broken forever and would never amount to anything again. What she never knew, what she never even suspected, was that Marcus had quietly and methodically saved $100 million over years of relentless hard labor and sacrifice. While she flaunted her new glamorous life around town, Marcus rebuilt his entire existence in complete silence, through grueling therapy, unwavering determination, sheer grit, and eventually a thriving company that proudly carried his family name. Years later, when Jennifer saw him again, walking tall, powerful, successful, and completely untouchable, the bitter tears streaming down her face told the entire world she had lost infinitely more than she ever could have imagined. Marcus Thompson had always been the kind of man who believed deeply in tomorrow, in the promise of better days ahead. Every single shift, every hard-earned dollar, every drop of sweat that fell from his brow, he carefully stored away like a devoted farmer planting precious seeds for a harvest he might never live to see. For 20 long, grueling years, he worked punishing double shifts at the massive industrial factory on the outskirts of town. The constant clang of heavy metal, the sharp sting of industrial grease burning his nostrils, the persistent ache that settled deep in his shoulders and never truly left. None of it managed to break his iron spirit or diminish his resolve. Neighbors whispered sometimes when they gathered on their front porches in the evenings, shaking their heads in bewilderment. That Marcus Thompson never spends a single dime on himself, lives like a monk. What's he even saving all that money for anyway? But Marcus knew exactly what he was saving for, with crystal clear certainty. He was saving for security, for dignity, for an unshakable foundation, for a future where his beloved wife Jennifer would never have to worry about money or want for anything her heart desired. He came home late most nights, his work boots heavy with exhaustion, his calloused hands trembling slightly from the day's labor, but always with that quiet, contented smile playing at the corners of his mouth. Then came that terrible, life-changing night that would haunt him forever. Rain hammered relentlessly against the windshield as Marcus drove home through the darkened streets, his wipers struggling against the torrential downpour. Headlights carved dim paths through the overwhelming darkness. He was bone-tired, far too tired to be driving safely, but he pressed on with determination, eager to get home to Jennifer. A sudden screech of tires, a terrifying blur of oncoming headlights, the crushing, devastating impact that seemed to last forever, and then complete, deafening silence that stretched on endlessly. When he finally opened his eyes in the sterile hospital room, the entire world had fundamentally changed around him. His legs, the legs that had carried him through 20 years of factory work, they wouldn't move at all. He tried desperately, begging them silently to lift even just an inch, but absolutely nothing happened. The sterile air reeked of harsh antiseptic chemicals. The fluorescent lights hummed ominously overhead, and his heart sank like a stone as the doctor's clinical voice broke through his desperate hope like a hammer blow. "Mr. Thompson, I'm afraid you'll need a wheelchair permanently. The damage to your spinal cord is extensive and irreversible." At first, Marcus genuinely thought he'd eventually find some way to adjust to his new reality, to make peace with his circumstances. But the months that followed proved to be absolutely brutal and soul-crushing. He was unceremoniously let go from his factory job without ceremony or compassion. Downsizing, they called it coldly, but Marcus knew the ugly truth. They simply couldn't see past the wheelchair, couldn't imagine him as anything more than a liability. Bills began piling up like heavy bricks pressing down on his chest, making it hard to breathe. The home that had once carried such warmth and love now echoed constantly with growing tension and unspoken resentment. Jennifer's frustrated sighs grew progressively louder and sharper with each passing day. She deliberately avoided his desperate gaze, turning away whenever he tried to make eye contact. Her footsteps became increasingly impatient as they clicked across the cold kitchen tiles. The neighbors noticed the change immediately, of course. Out on Mrs. Peterson's front porch, two elderly women whispered conspiratorially over their steaming coffee mugs. "Such a terrible shame, really. That poor man worked his entire life, sacrificed everything." Indeed. And just look at her face now. She certainly doesn't look happy at all anymore, does she? Marcus heard every whispered word, every pitying comment. He always did. At night, feeling utterly defeated, he wheeled himself slowly to the living room window, staring out at the lonely streetlight's pale glow, desperately trying to remind his broken spirit that he was still a man, still breathing, still possessed inherent worth and dignity. But deep inside his chest, a terrible crack was steadily spreading, threatening to shatter everything he thought he knew about himself. Jennifer barely touched him anymore, recoiling as if he carried some contagious disease. She spoke to him like he was nothing more than a burdensome obligation, not the life partner she had once promised to love through sickness and health. And when Marcus reached out hopefully for her hand one particularly lonely night, seeking just a moment of human connection and comfort, she pulled, led away sharply as if burned, muttering bitterly under her breath, This isn't the life I signed up for, Marcus. This isn't what I agreed to." The crushing silence that followed her harsh words was somehow louder and more devastating than any storm nature could unleash. Days bled slowly and painfully into weeks, and weeks dragged endlessly into months of growing despair. Every single morning carried with it the same cruel, inescapable reminder that his legs had completely abandoned him, leaving him trapped and helpless. Jennifer's once bright smile had vanished entirely, replaced by a permanent mask of resentment and barely concealed disgust. She moved through their shared house like an unwilling guest trapped in completely the wrong place, slamming cabinet doors with unnecessary force, leaving dirty plates half-washed and abandoned in the cluttered sink. One particularly tense evening, as Marcus tried desperately to help set the dinner table and contribute something meaningful to their household routine, a ceramic plate slipped treacherously from his trembling, unsteady hands and shattered dramatically on the hard kitchen floor. He froze completely, immediately apologizing profusely, but Jennifer's face twisted into an expression of pure disgust and fury. "Marcus!" she snapped viciously, her voice cutting far sharper than the ceramic shards scattered at his feet. "I can't keep doing this forever. I can't keep living like this. I didn't marry this broken shell of a person." Her cruel words lingered poisonously in the air long after she stormed angrily out of the room, leaving Marcus sitting motionless in his wheelchair, staring at his fractured reflection in the sharp fragments scattered across the floor, wondering exactly when he had stopped being her beloved husband and become nothing more than her unwanted burden. By this point, all the neighbors had certainly noticed the dramatic change in their household dynamics. Two men working on a car in the driveway across the street whispered knowingly one sunny afternoon. "You hear the latest gossip about Jennifer Thompson? Word is she's always out gallivanting with that flashy guy Richard, letting him drive her around town in his expensive shiny car." "Yeah, it's really something. Poor Marcus Thompson. Most loyal man who ever lived, devoted his whole life to that woman. And just look at her behavior now. Shameful, really." Marcus didn't actually need to hear their whispered gossip to understand what was happening. He could already feel the emotional distance growing between them like a chasm. Jennifer's clothes grew progressively flashier and more expensive. Her perfume became heavier and more cloying. She came home later and later each night, sometimes not coming home at all, leaving Marcus alone with his thoughts and regrets. Then, one devastating night, the inevitable finally happened. Marcus wheeled himself slowly into the living room to find Jennifer frantically packing her expensive suitcases with grim determination. Her face wasn't angry or emotional this time. Instead, it was cold, calculating, and utterly final. Behind her stood Richard Mitchell, leaning casually against the doorway with smug confidence, his expensive gold watch gleaming ostentatiously under the dim lamplight. "I simply can't waste any more of my precious life like this, Marcus," Jennifer declared without even bothering to look directly at him. "I need and deserve someone who can actually take proper care of me, someone who can provide the lifestyle I want and deserve." Marcus's throat tightened painfully, his chest feeling heavy as if crushed by an enormous weight. He tried desperately to speak, to find some words that might change her mind, but the right words simply never formed and never left his mouth. Jennifer didn't bother waiting for any response from him anyway. She dragged her heavy suitcase determinedly out the front door and slipped her arm possessively into Richard's, her high heels clicking sharply and definitively down the wooden porch steps. The sound gradually faded into the darkness of the night, leaving Marcus completely alone in the suffocating silence of their empty home. For days afterward, the house felt exactly like a tomb. Empty, cold, and absolutely suffocating in its loneliness. He caught himself constantly listening hopefully for Jennifer's familiar footsteps, her distinctive laughter, even her frustrated sighs and complaints. But all he ever heard was the monotonous hum of the refrigerator and the lonely whisper of wind through the curtains. Alone and abandoned, Marcus sank deeper and deeper into himself, consumed by self-doubt and despair. The man who had once believed so fervently in tomorrow now seriously doubted if tomorrow would even bother to come at all. But what Jennifer never knew, what absolutely no one on that entire block ever suspected or could have imagined, was that Marcus wasn't nearly as broken and helpless as he appeared to everyone around him. Behind all the quiet pain and visible suffering, behind the wheelchair and the empty, echoing house, sat a man who had saved and invested wisely for decades with remarkable discipline. A man who quietly and secretly guarded nearly $100 million in carefully accumulated savings and investments. Money he had never flaunted or bragged about. Money he had never even mentioned to anyone, not to his closest friends, not even to his own wife during their most intimate conversations. Jennifer genuinely thought she was abandoning a completely crippled man with absolutely nothing to offer and no prospects for the future. But Marcus knew with absolute certainty that this terrible storm would not last forever, and that one day, somehow, he would find a way to rise again stronger than ever before. Mornings began to start well before sunrise as Marcus established a new routine. He would sit carefully at the edge of his bed, placing his palms firmly on his thighs, methodically counting each breath. 1, 2, 3. He tightened the leather glove on his right hand, rolled efficiently to the bathroom, splashed refreshing cool water on his weathered face, and stared intently at himself in the mirror. The eyes looking back were tired and worn, certainly, but they were also steady and determined. That hard-earned steadiness gradually became the foundation of his master plan. He opened a worn, leather-bound notebook and carefully drew neat columns across the pages. Cash, skills, people. No grand speeches or dramatic gestures, no desperate attempts at miracle moves, just quiet, methodical arithmetic and planning. 20 years of grueling work in various factories had taught him invaluable lessons about supply lines, safety protocols, maintenance schedules, and industrial efficiency. He knew instinctively where most companies bled money unnecessarily through downtime, defective parts, and missed inspections. More importantly, he knew exactly how to fix those expensive leaks and inefficiencies. He registered a modest outfit operating from his living room, Thompson Industrial Services, one slightly outdated laptop balanced precariously on a wobbly desk, a reliable second-hand printer, and a landline phone with a ringtone that made him jump nervously every single time it worked. He hired 2 competent freelancers initially, one experienced inspector and one efficient scheduler. He made absolutely certain to pay them well and always on time without fail. "We handle small jobs exclusively, but we do them absolutely clean and professional," he explained to them quietly but firmly. "No promises we can't keep, no commitments we can't honor." The very first client came through AF, former factory supervisor who still maintained genuine respect for Marcus despite his circumstances. It was a tiny manufacturing plant with rusted valves and complete paperwork chaos. Marcus arrived professionally in a branded van that he couldn't drive himself, clipboard balanced expertly on his knees, his experienced eyes systematically scanning absolutely everything with practiced precision. He deliberately spoke less and listened far more intently. He quickly identified the underlying pattern of problems: missed safety checks, no logical inventory system, constant panic shifts and emergency repairs. He drew a simple but effective grid on the conference room whiteboard, the marker squeaking slightly as he worked, and the experienced foreman nodded approvingly like he'd been handed a breath of fresh air. 2 weeks, Marcus said calmly, his voice completely even and confident. "You'll definitely feel the difference throughout the entire operation." They absolutely did feel the difference, and it was remarkable. Not magic or miracles, just systematic schedule discipline and common sense organization. Spare part bins were labeled properly and logically. A rotation system that didn't break people physically or mentally. Costs stopped hemorrhaging money. Machines stopped their constant whining and complaining. The grateful plant manager shook Marcus's hand warmly and whispered enthusiastically to someone at another industrial site. That single whisper of recommendation traveled quickly through the tight-knit industrial community. By the 3rd month of operation, the cramped living room simply couldn't contain the rapidly growing operation any longer. He leased a modest but professional office space with convenient ground floor access and a wheelchair ramp that didn't squeal embarrassingly when used. The place smelled pleasantly of fresh paint and strong coffee. A radio murmured quietly in the background, providing a comfortable atmosphere. He deliberately kept the main door slightly cracked open so his growing staff could feel his consistent presence without the oppressive weight of micromanagement. Every single invoice went out completely clean and professional-looking. Every contractor and freelancer got paid promptly before they even needed to ask. Word spread rapidly through the industrial network. "That Thompson guy in the wheelchair runs an incredibly tight ship. Professional operation." On lunch breaks, people throughout the area talked about the growing company. 2 delivery couriers trading packages paused to chat. "That Thompson fellow, quiet but deadly effective. All his clients absolutely love him." "He's in a wheelchair, right?" "Yeah, that's him. And he's moving forward like an unstoppable freight train." Marcus overheard one such conversation, smiled quietly into his paper coffee cup, and calmly got back to his strategic planning grid. Physical therapy became the other critically important half of his daily routine. Cold floors, sharp disinfectant sting in his nostrils. A metronome ticked steadily while he gripped parallel bars with white knuckles, his shoulders trembling with tremendous effort. The experienced therapist carefully adjusted his hip position by tiny millimeters. "Weight through the heel, breathe deeply." Sweat rolled steadily into his collar. Breath came in short, labored bursts. One session, he managed to stand for exactly 9 seconds. Another week, a full 12 seconds. He logged every precious second like tracking revenue growth. No applause or celebration, just a tiny nod of acknowledgement and a towel pressed to his sweating face. At night, he wheeled systematic laps around the office, carefully reading maintenance logs and service reports, marking important patterns with a blunt pencil. Contracts continued growing steadily, a regional bakery production line, then a plastics manufacturing plant, then a municipal water treatment facility with alarms that cried wolf constantly at 2 o'clock a.m. His crew rotated on calm, predictable schedules that respected their personal lives. He called every foreman by their first name and treated them with genuine respect. "We're not heroes or miracle workers," he told them with quiet conviction. "We're reliable professionals, Reliability pays consistently. Money steadily stacked up in business accounts, and the wheelchair creaked less frequently because he had taken the time to oil it himself properly. The company books balanced perfectly every month. Payroll hit employee accounts early. The entrance ramp outside gleamed from his regular scrubs and maintenance. He added comprehensive health insurance coverage for all his people, a significant expense, but the right thing to do. They stared at the email announcement like it was some kind of impossible myth come true. Physical therapy gradually changed shape and intensity. Specialized braces, a black elastic band pulling consistently at his ankle joint. He learned to shift his body weight efficiently without locking his jaw in concentration. One quiet afternoon, with the therapy room peaceful and the wall clock indifferent to his struggle, he rose carefully, hands gripping the bars firmly, and moved his left foot the exact width of a credit card. The therapist didn't cheer or celebrate. She simply whispered encouragingly, "Again." He managed it twice more, then sat down carefully, chest heaving with exertion. A genuine laugh broke loose before he could stop it. Not a loud, boisterous laugh, but more like air finally finding space to breathe. He didn't tell anyone about this breakthrough. He genuinely liked and treasured the privacy of his gradual progress. Outside the office building, a pair of temporary workers smoked cigarettes by the curb, gossiping. "Heard he's loaded now, making serious money." "Nah, man, he just runs the operation incredibly smart and professional." Marcus passed them quietly, nodded politely, and held the door open courteously. The small courtesy that silently communicated, "We're building something substantial here. Don't jinx it with negativity." Quarter by quarter, Thompson Industrial Services systematically shed its small startup label. Vendors stopped haggling over prices and started asking earnestly for long-term partnership agreements. A local banker offered coffee and conversation. Marcus politely declined the loan offer, but gratefully accepted the respectful handshake. One quiet evening, alone under the steady buzz of the exit sign, he stood again without assistance. No parallel bars this time, just the solid desk edge at his fingertips for minimal support. He placed his right foot forward, slow and deliberate as a clock hand, then carefully the left foot. 2 complete steps. He sat down with extreme care, head bowed respectfully, palms covering his face as emotions overwhelmed him. No fireworks or crowds, just the profound sound of a determined man returning to himself one carefully measured inch at a time. Jennifer's exciting new life looked absolutely shiny and glamorous at first glance. Richard Mitchell had all the right swagger. Fast cars, perfectly tailored suits, restaurant reservations that always had her name prominently on the guest list. He whispered seductive promises over expensive champagne flutes, called her darling in front of impressed strangers, and made her feel like she had finally stepped into the luxurious lifestyle she had always felt she deserved. But thin gold paint peels away quickly when it's applied over cheap metal. Months into the relationship, the cars ain't always legally his. The expensive dinners became fewer and farther between, the unpaid tabs heavier and more concerning. Richard's phone rang far too often with angry, threatening voices demanding payment. Jennifer began noticing the way he skillfully avoided direct eye contact whenever bills arrived, the way his expensive cologne seemed designed to cover nervous sweat and anxiety. She tried to push her growing questions aside, desperately convincing herself that she had genuinely upgraded her life situation. Yet deep down in her gut, a persistent unease gnawed constantly at her confidence. Then one terrible night, Richard simply vanished without explanation or warning. His expensive suits disappeared from the shared closet, his watch collection completely empty. A single note remained on the kitchen counter. "I can't carry you anymore. This isn't working." Just like that, Jennifer found herself completely abandoned and alone. She had callously traded a man who loved her unconditionally through sweat, through difficult years, through life's worst storms, for someone who used her conveniently as long as it served his purposes. Broke, desperate, and utterly alone, she wandered aimlessly through the same streets she had once paraded down so proudly. At the neighborhood grocery store, whispers followed her like persistent shadows. Two women by the fresh fruit stand murmured knowingly to each other. "That's Jennifer Thompson. She thought she had made it big, living the high life." Just look at her now. Life has a way of coming back around, doesn't it? The painful gossip burned worse than actual hunger pangs. Days later, while walking aimlessly through the busy downtown area, she stopped completely dead in her tracks. Across the wide street, surrounded by well-dressed staff members and sharp business suits, stepping confidently out of a gleaming black luxury car, he was Marcus. But this definitely wasn't the same Marcus she had so cruelly abandoned. This Marcus walked steady and confident, somehow appearing taller and more imposing than she remembered. His entire frame carried visible strength and authority again, his face carved with unmistakable determination and success. He wore an impeccably tailored suit, subtle but undeniably commanding in its quality. And when he turned to address his staff, employees waited respectfully for his words before moving. A professional company logo reading Thompson Industrial Services shone prominently on the impressive building behind him. Jennifer's breath caught painfully in her throat, her knees buckled weakly. She gripped a nearby lamppost desperately, staring in complete shock as the man she had discarded so thoughtlessly had somehow managed to roll the wheel of fate completely in his favor. She crossed the busy street in a complete haze, tears streaming uncontrollably down her cheeks before any words could even form properly. "Marcus," she stammered desperately, "I had no idea you could walk again. I never knew you could recover like this." He looked at her briefly for just a moment. Distant memories flickered somewhere behind his eyes. The dinners they had once shared so happily, the nights of genuine laughter before the terrible storms arrived. But his eyes held absolutely no warmth now, only a calm determination she couldn't break through or manipulate. "Yes," he said simply, his voice carrying no anger, no desire for revenge, just simple, unshakable truth. Jennifer dropped to her knees right there on the public pavement, not caring about the scene she was creating. Pedestrians paused in their daily routines, phones half raised to capture the drama. The scene drew immediate murmurs of recognition. "That's his ex-wife, isn't it?" someone whispered knowingly. "Yeah, she's the one who left him when he was down and struggling. Look at him now, though." The growing crow. Dee didn't mock or ridicule Marcus at all. They looked at him with genuine respect and admiration. They saved all their shame and judgment for her. Jennifer begged desperately, her voice cracking with raw emotion, her carefully applied mascara smudged and running. "I was completely wrong about everything. I was scared and selfish. I had no idea you would ever—" But Marcus didn't need to hear the rest of her desperate excuses and explanations. He stepped past her without hesitation, his professional employees falling naturally into line behind him, the sound of polished leather shoes against concrete completely drowning out her pathetic sobs. For the first time in years, Marcus didn't feel the crushing weight of being left behind and abandoned. Instead, he felt the crystal-clear clarity of a man who had survived the worst possible storm and risen infinitely higher than anyone could have imagined. Jennifer reached desperately for his sleeve as he passed by, but her grasping fingers caught only empty air. He didn't slow his pace, didn't look back over his shoulder, didn't acknowledge her presence in any way. That night, as the bright city lights glowed brilliantly against the glass walls of his impressive corner office, Marcus stood by the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the urban landscape he had conquered. His reflection in the glass showed a man who had indeed been broken at one point, yes, but definitely not destroyed or defeated. The wheelchair sitting quietly in the corner reminded him of the incredible journey he had traveled, The company logo, prominently displayed on the wall, reminded him of his hard-won triumph. He whispered to himself, almost like a prayer of gratitude, "Storms don't actually break you if you're strong enough. They reveal who was never meant to stand beside you in the first place." And outside, somewhere in the darkness, Jennifer wept alone and abandoned, finally learning the true price of betrayal and disloyalty. Because Marcus hadn't just learned to walk again, he had learned to rise completely beyond her reach, beyond her influence, beyond her ability to hurt him ever again.